This is Experience Imagination, a themed entertainment podcast by FALCON'S Creative Group.
Story connects people to the experience.
Every aspect of creativity is brought together.
We wanted to do something different and fresh.
There are so many different disciplines that are involved in this industry.
Nothing will get you further than your passion.
This entire process is just making us better designers.
We're really pushing the envelope.
Welcome back to Experience Imagination. I'm Audrey DeLong. Today's topic is animation, and yes, there are a lot of directions you can go in for that one topic. They'll likely all lead to an engaging conversation, but for this episode, we're going to mainly talk about the process of creating animated characters. We'll discuss how it all comes together technically, but because we like storytelling around here, I'm going to ask our panelists a few non-technical questions. So who are today's panelists? Well, we have Patrick Finley, one of our creative directors who is relatively new to FALCON'S, so we're going to use this platform to introduce him and what he brings to our company. And we also have Tamoria and Alexis Lariscy, who work on the media creation side of the studio and have experience animating. To help you get in the right mindset for this discussion, I want you to picture one of your favorite animated characters. Think about their eyes, their clothes, their body style, the way they walk and talk, the way they eat, and how they express themselves. All right, you got a good image? I'm picturing Homer Simpson right now. Welcome, panelists. Let's go around the table and just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Patrick Finley, and I'm a creative director here at FALCON'S Creative Group, and I'm focusing on Unreal projects.
I'm Alexis Lariscy. I am a generalist here at FALCON'S Creative Group with a background in character animation.
Hi, I'm Tamoria. I am a production coordinator here and have a background in character animation as well.
All right, so I want to start with Patrick. You have a little bit longer history than Alexis and John. You worked at some of the most well-known studios in the world, Walt Disney Animation, Digital Domain, Sony Pictures Imageworks. I stalked you on LinkedIn, so I know this. And that's just to name a few. So you've contributed to nearly 30 feature films in your career?
That's correct.
Is that right? So in what capacity did you serve, and then how did your skill set that you had before coming into FALCON'S, how does it contribute to your job here as a creative director?
Sure thing, yeah. Besides my sort of film industry, I've also spent a lot of time in sort of the augmented reality world. I spent 6 years as a creative director at Magic Leap, creating content for them, and also designing spaces where the content would happen. But in the film industry, I was there for about 14 years, working across a variety of projects, live action and animated features. I was primarily in the sort of lighting, look development, and compositing realm. And so it was taking the environments, it was taking the characters and layering it all together and helping to set the mood and the tone through sort of light and color and then layering of all the assets.
Okay. Alexis, tell us about your career progression. Where did you come from and what do you do now?
So I started in high school taking a bunch of art classes, went to Ringling College of Art and Design and studied computer animation. I've worked on various animation projects here at FALCON'S. I do storyboards. I'm kind of all around.
A little bit of concept art?
Yeah, concept art, just kind of all different areas in the pipeline.
Okay, John.
Weird. I actually started as a mortgage broker for 10 years, and I guess I had a early midlife crisis, and so I went to school for animation and ended up here at FALCON'S, worked on a lot of the animation here, and now I'm in a hybrid role to better support the needs of our complex projects.
All right, so I want to give everybody a quick summary of the main steps in the 3D animation production process when it comes to character animation. First comes concept art of the character, then we model in texture, and then we rig it, which the next step in the process is animators posing it and animating the character, obviously. And then the last line is rendering. And so let's talk about the first step. That's the 2D image of the character. It can be interpreted a lot of different ways. When preparing for this podcast, I read a blog that our CG supervisor, Anthony Solitario, wrote about animation and animation styles, particularly. One of the things that caught my attention was the entire tone of a 3D project can be influenced by the concept art. How so, Alexis?
So concept art is one of the first like building blocks of an entire project. That's going to determine the entire project essentially. So depending upon like if the concept art is going to be cutesy for little kids, like you're going to have like specific shape languages, like you're going to have soft corners, edges, things like that. You're going to probably have more bouncy animation, like fun animation, exaggerated animation. If you're going for more of like a realistic, gritty reality, then you're going to have more like sharp edges, sharp characters. We're going to lean more probably on looking at mocap, which is motion capture, which is very realistic movement straight from reality.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, in your experience, you said you worked on a lot of feature films. Can we name a couple of them?
One that I was very proud of being a part of, I got to work on the movie Big Hero 6 at Disney, and that was an animated feature with them. Worked on some other animated features, another one called Surf's Up, G-Force with sort of guinea pigs. And there's kind of a long list. There's a bunch of them in there.
Yeah. So talk about Big Hero 6 and the animation style and what led to creating that type of style for that feature film.
Well, that one was sort of a departure for Disney. They wanted to sort of get into the sort of the superhero genre. And so it had, a lot of the classic Disney styling with characters, but just sort of pushing it to that sort of superhero edge. And with Disney, as with, most other places, it starts with the drawing. Mm-hmm. And, there's an entire huge floor with artists just cranking out characters and environments and really imbibing good life and emotion and feeling into those characters. And it's critically important in that drawing stage so that it can then sort of work its way down into all the other stages. And then when you breathe life into it with animation, it just sort of, comes alive.
It's a fun process. Mm-hmm. What sorts of questions are asked before you get to modeling and texturing? Going back to the steps in the production pipeline, I'm sure there's questions that have to be answered before you model and texture a character. John?
Yeah, first thing I can think of is like, is there enough views of the character? Can we see the back, front? Can we get a good representation of them in 3D from the 2D drawings? Another thing is, what are they wearing or what are their materials made of? Is it thick? Does it flow? Is it rigid? Another kind of a big thing is how do they move? So where do they articulate from? Do they have any special traits? Like, can they expand their head or something like that? Like, are we going to need more geo in certain places that need to kind of bend more? So
explain what geo is.
So in animation, geo is short for geometry. And in our animation software, that's what our objects are kind of built off of, a bunch of geometric shapes. And that's how we kind of get things to deform.
Just having it built in such a way that the elbows can deform properly and the arms can raise without it sort of acting in a weird, unusual sort of manner.
It's like the skin, essentially, of the character. Yeah. You have to have more polygons, which would be the skin again. You would create more edge loops. All those things build up to a more like flexible area of a character.
And I've seen it happen quite often where the original sort of 2D designs, there are these wonderful designs, but the directors or the animation supervisor or whomever wants the character to have a certain performance, but their legs are too short or their arms are too long or whatever it might be. And that has to go back into design and change the character a little bit so that it can sort of have the performance that is sort of desired or requested.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask you that. If it ever bounced back to concept art.
That happens quite often. Often.
Okay.
And another thing, we're talking about, all the drawings of the face from different angles, and another really important one to nail in drawing is the expressions, the smiling, the sadness, the happy, and to get the eyebrows and the mouth and the nose and what happens to the face during all the various expressions, and having that as a guide for the modeling artist to sort of work off of.
I'm glad you brought up expressions because I'm wondering, is there an expression that you can think of that's like extra difficult to animate?
The hardest things for me personally to do is like the more subtle kind of expressions. So if it's jealousy or something like, and there's various like exaggerations, right? You can go super jealous or like just subtly jealous. But those are the kind of things that are like hardest. So it's like, is the eyelid a little too low? Is it a little too high? very small like distance to get it right.
It's the same thing with acting. If you really want to underplay something, that's really when the good acting comes and you're like, oh, that's so juicy. They nailed that. And they barely move their eyebrows or their mouth or something, but you totally understand what they're feeling.
Subtle animation's like probably the hardest, where like there's not a lot of movement, whether it be in the body or the face. And trying to make sure that your message is getting through to the audience can be difficult.
Yeah.
Which is why it's great to have like a team and stuff, because that way we can like kind of bounce that back between us. And like I might think that it's going to come across one way, and then somebody comes in and looks at it and it is not that way. And I'm like, oh, shoot. And I got to reverse and figure out, why is it not portraying what I want it to portray?
I read this, that in the real world, when you're shooting live action, you shoot it and then you edit it. But in the animation process, it's the opposite. You're actually editing on paper before you animate. Is that right?
Yeah, with storyboards, definitely. So it starts with the script, and then the storyboard artist would get that script. We then visualize that on paper, kind of rough, like where the camera would be, like your composition. And then from there, the storyboards jump to the animatic phase, which is where they bring all those single images into a software where it runs it through like a movie. It's edited there. And then the director, supervisors, we all sit down, watch that animatic. And once that's approved, then it would go on to being created into the 3D space.
Getting a good animatic is key to sort of, it saves a lot of time and mistakes happening further down. It's a good sort of, Bible to sort of work off of.
I can't imagine any project that I've worked on at Falcons that if we didn't have a storyboard that we then turn into an animatic. I can't imagine what the animation process would look like if that didn't exist.
Thank you, Alexis. She's also our main storyboard artist. So.
Yeah.
That is a help.
Yeah, you're really good too.
It's a lot. I really love storyboarding.
Yeah. All right, so Alexis, how do we choose between hand keying and mocapping?
Yeah, depending upon the project we're on, kind of will dictate whether we go the route of mocap or we go the route of hand keying. So hand keying would be we're doing it ourselves, like we're not having that mocap base. So mocap is the method of essentially putting on a suit that has a bunch of little dots on it, and the cameras will read the dots as the person is performing the acting, and it will then go into the computer, and we will be able to take that as like the base animation, bring it into Maya, and then we will clean it up, we'll add to it, exaggerate things depending upon what that shot calls for. So if we're going for a more realistic project, then mocap is definitely kind of the way you want to go. If we're going for something fantasy or like a character like a dragon or something that doesn't really exist, then we're probably going to look more at hand keying. For that, then I usually look at a lot of reference. So if I'm going for like a dragon, I'm going to be looking up probably lizards or things in our world that I can then do like a comparative anatomy essentially to that creature to then try to get a realistic performance out of it.
Well, we've done dragons at Falcons.
Yeah.
And a lot of other companies have done dragons. Yes. Dragons have starred in feature film. So would you ever look at those feature films for inspiration?
Like one of the biggest tools like we as animators use is reference. So even when you're doing mocap, you might not know how you're supposed to move in whatever you're acting as. So having reference is kind of crucial for anything. And I think it's beneficial to kind of act it out yourself, even if you're not doing mocap or anything, just to act it out yourself, just so you know, oh, my arm wouldn't swing that way or something like that. So.
Yeah, if anybody's ever bored out there, just YouTube some videos about animators acting out in motion capture. It's quite funny.
See some really great performances.
You do, yeah. They're working out their like inner acting child in those shots.
It's interesting with, you brought up mocap, and I've worked on a few projects that were mocap based, and they were really fantastic at sort of locking down the sort of entire animation performance for, say, an animated feature, and blocking out multiple characters at once, and beginning to sort of, from beginning to end, get an idea of pacing and timing. And then even, using things like Unreal Engine, being able to have the director get in there with cameras and capture camera performance while the whole thing was happening. And so there was one person that had a camera and was capturing the mocap actors while they were performing. And just to be able to like lock it all down even if it was going to change, it was still sort of a really powerful step.
Well, we've seen technology for facial motion capture become more and more advanced. And again, if you want to watch some YouTube videos, like Avatar: The Way of Water, that's a really good example because James Cameron has a way of like just elevating the craft. But talk about facial motion capture at Falcons. How does that process work?
Facial animation is quite complicated, and it depends on the rig's capabilities, on how far you kind of want to take it, but it can get very complex. So you can have more controls in the face than the whole body combined. So
for real?
Yeah.
Why is that? Just mouth, nose, eyebrows?
Yeah,
There's just so much going on there.
The way the skin moves, your cheeks, the face actually has a lot of moving parts. So if you're going for realism in CG, that's probably one of the hardest things to do. I think Anthony had mentioned this in his thing, but it's very easy to dip in that kind of like uncanny valley territory.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, explain Uncanny Valley.
uncanny valley is when you kind of the human brain kind of like knows something isn't real. So in CG, that's kind of the term we use to know, like, something isn't right.
Oh, okay.
The character has fallen into the uncanny
Yeah,
valley.
exactly.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah that you may not be able to immediately know what's wrong with the character, but your brain just tells you that something is off.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you sort of lose that attachment to that character, or you become uncomfortable with the character because it doesn't quite look real. And that's why I think when studios decide to do something, they have to choose, like, do you want to go sort of 100% photoreal and face that challenge, or do you stay in a more stylized realm where you have a bit more leeway and you don't sort of worry about sort of falling into the valley?
Okay, because it takes you out of the story.
It does. It definitely takes you out of the story. Yeah.
Well, like Anthony mentioned in his blog, an important part of the animation process is determining the right style. So I want to talk about two of the most common styles. So the first one is realistic, and I want to bring this up first because we worked on Becoming Jane, the evolution of Dr. Jane Goodall for the National Geographic Museum, which was an award-winning exhibition, and it really delved into her life's work in Africa, working with chimpanzees. And there was one animator at the time who modified a pair of, just human crutches and kind of sawed them down to get to the level of how a chimpanzee walks. And they walked around the office. He took them home and played around with it just to kind of get used to how they move. And he used that as a tool, if you will, in his process. So, talk about realism animation, like that realistic style. Patrick, I'm sure you've worked on a little bit of projects with realism. How does that compare to something that's not as realistic?
With realism and say like a live action feature where you're doing like a digital stunt double that's replacing the actual character that's in there but doing much more complex stunts. With that you need sort of a much higher level of realism. The movement needs to look and feel completely real. It might be something where you start off with mocap and then you may sort of divert from that because, say, it's like a superhero movie and your superhero is doing something fantastic. You're going to be pushing the boundaries of what that person can do while still sort of staying in that sort of realm of realism. So yeah, it's probably the hardest sort of space for an animator to be in and perform, to sort of make something, say, fantastic and above and beyond what a normal human could do, but still feel as if it's somewhat feasible and real.
Well, one of my favorites, stylized or cartoon, that style, which obviously we do a lot at Falcons as well. But Patrick, in your experience, what does that process look like?
I would think that most animators probably really love that space because they really get to do their thing and be creative and imbibe character into this thing and sort of really breathe life into it from scratch versus sort of working from the mocap and then sort of adding performance on top of that. They're sort of, from the beginning sort of doing their own thing. And I feel like that's sort of a really great place for an animator to be. Yeah.
In your experience at Falcons, talk about a project that we've worked on that's stylized or cartoon.
One that comes to mind is Storybots. So that was one of the first projects I actually worked on here. And it was for the Space Adventure episode. And it was a ton of fun. Like, the little Storybot characters, they're so simplistic, so you can kind of get away with a lot of like pushing those 12 principles of animation. So like kind of the squash and stretch and follow through and all these different things. And so like we were able to kind of like play with all these like different fun shapes and stuff because they are so simplistic.
And not really human either.
No, yeah, they're
They
like
don't move
they
like
look kind
that.
of like little pill shapes, and they were a ton of fun to work with.
Yeah.
Like that was a very stylized project here.
So when we say stylized, that's like, is that the complete opposite of realism?
I wouldn't say so. I think you can have a little bit of both. Storybots was before I got here, so I would have loved to work on that. But when I got here, we were working a lot on our Kathmandu projects. There were some moments where we kind of added some more like stylistic things like smears and stuff. And it's hard to visualize when something's going fast, right? So smears can be anything in animation where your arms or limbs or whatever's moving fast can deform pretty crazily. So we've kind of dabbled in like, characters doing that kind of thing. And that part of it is pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about the Busby character because in Kathmandu, he's a robot. So, he's not going to move the same as a human, but he has human characteristics, especially his emotions are kind of based on human emotions. So, Alexis, did you animate Busby at all? What was your experience?
Yes, I did. I animated him quite a bit, actually, out of the characters. He was, like, really interesting because, yeah, you're grounded in kind of the human movements, but because he's a robot, you could definitely take liberties and kind of exaggerate what we could do with him. Another interesting thing about him is that he didn't have a mouth. So we had to really push the eye animation to make sure that we were conveying what he was feeling, even into his body. So, like, if he was upset, we really had to, like, pull that into his shoulders or pull that into his eyelids or even, like, his eye shape. He was, like, a really fun character to animate, too, actually. Thinking about him, like, yeah, he was wild.
Interesting. It made me think about characters and, if you have just a couple of shots with a character, you can have a single animator do that performance. But say you're doing a feature-length movie with an animated character, you're not going to have one animator do the entire film. It's just not sort of realistic or feasible. And so you need to get multiple artists all on board that know how to animate that character and capture their nuances and their movement. And that's just kind of, I'd never really thought about that, but it's interesting to kind of get through that and sort of get everyone on the same sort of creative level with how that character sort of acts.
For sure. Yeah.
So switching gears now, we've been using real-time game engines for a lot of different applications at FALCON'S, but more and more we're using it for animation. So why is that, and what does it allow us to do that we couldn't do before?
Probably, like, it helps us see things quicker. With Unreal, I'm able to see that finished product a lot faster. And we're able to kind of go back and forth more with other teams, I feel like, because of that.
Unreal Engine is putting a ton of resources, and their newest version that just came out has a lot of improvements in there. And it's going to take time, one, for the tools to get there so that they're as powerful as Maya and other packages. And then also time for the animators who animate so well in their native package to get comfortable animating in Unreal Engine. But it's getting there. And before long, you'll see more and more people sort of staying in Unreal Engine the whole time.
If they can get there and have the same tool sets and the same kind of feel as animating in Maya, I think that's the future.
So if you're out there listening and you want to become an animator, start to learn Unreal.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with Patrick. Tell us about a rewarding animation experience you've had.
I think my favorite animation experience would be at the Walt Disney Animation Studio working on Big Hero 6 and just sort of, see that process coming along and, going from sort of drawing and concept into rough animation and then into sort of final animation and seeing the modeling and how important the modeling is to sort of get the characters just right so that, you really just kind of fall in love with them.
All right, Alexis, tell us about a rewarding animation experience you've had.
I'm probably going to jump back to Storybots.
I knew you would.
I know. It was just so much fun. And, like, getting to actually see it on Netflix and knowing that, like, kids watched that and, like, hopefully they enjoyed it. And, like, that's the whole reason I got into all this was because cartoons and movies and television and theme parks, all these things brought me joy growing up. And I just want to return that joy and, like, fun to the audience.
All right, John.
My kids watched it.
What did they think?
They love Storybots, so it was awesome. For me, I think the most rewarding experiences I have is when I can kind of solve like a more technical like animation issue. So in particular, I had a shot where like one of our animals was like stacking cups. And in animation, the objects aren't actually real, so they don't touch each other and react with each other. So figuring that out, it's hard, but it's also fun. So
It was a super cute animation too. It came out really good.
All right, so this is a fun question, and we'll end it here. Hopefully it's not too challenging. But which popular animated character do you wish you had a hand in animating, and why? John?
It's got to be Wreck-It Ralph for me, because he's kind of the gateway that kind of got me into even knowing that I could do this as a job. When I went to tour Disney, that's the movie they were working on. And so just seeing, what they were doing with the characters made me realize, I could do that. So
Okay, Alexis.
Danny Phantom. That show is the show that I vividly can remember watching it and being like, that is what I want to work on. Like that. I used to watch it all the time. I have a tattoo. That show, I owe that show why I'm here in this industry.
Would you say obsessed? Is that the word?
Yeah, probably, hyperfixation. Again, I don't know if it wasn't for Danny Phantom, I don't know. I might have been like a marine biologist or something. Because that's something else I like. And yeah, it's wild.
Patrick, do you have a good story to share?
Well, something about Disney Tangled ticked something for me.
Yeah.
The movie I think they'd done before was Bolt, and they were sort of starting to get into more serious into these 3D projects. And yeah, something about Tangled just sort of resonates with me, and just the transferring that wonderful sort of style from the earlier Disney movies over into a 3D film. And it's just really well done. And yeah, it would have been fantastic, I think, to be an animator on that.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was fantastic. I had a lot of fun talking about animation and character animation. So, John, thanks for being here.
thank you.
Alexis.
Thank you.
And Patrick.
Thank you very much.
That wraps up this episode. A special thanks to all of my colleagues, Alexis Lariscy, John Tamoria, and Patrick Finley for speaking with me. I also want to thank Anthony Solitario, our CG supervisor, for writing his blog called Choosing the Right Animation Style for Your Project. You can find that on the Falcons Creative Group website under News and Blog. And thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back next month for an all-new episode. Thank you for listening to Experience Imagination, a Falcons Creative Group production. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. Be sure to check out falconscreativegroup.com and follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you have ideas for future episodes or just want to drop us a message, send an email to podcast@falconscreativegroup.com.